Hey everybody, welcome to XML Plus Development Tips and Tricks plus D365FO Tools. This is a re-recording of a session that was presented at AXUG/D365UG in fall of 2021. We've been asked to re-record it, so this is the re-recording. This is mostly the same content that was presented in the original presentation, but a few things have been tweaked, changed, updated, and also I have a co-presenter. So what we'll cover in this is just high-level tips and tricks, tools to get just more stuff done, help with complicated processes, and just overall improve your experience with development or development adjacent activities in F&O. My name is Nathan Clouse. I'm a technical architect with Invista Corporation. I'm also a business applications MVP. There's all my contact info. I have a blog at Atomic AX that I've been blogging at for 10 or 12 years so far, as well as dynamics.fo that has a lot of information about new stuff that's coming out that was just released for Microsoft for the F&O, and I'm also available on Twitter, so if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out. And then I'll hand it over to Peter.
Hello, my name is Peter Raymer. I'm a director at RSM, and first I want to thank Nathan for inviting me to co-present with him. I'm really honored. I'm a huge fan of Nathan's, and yeah, just really excited to get to present and teach you guys today. I also have a YouTube channel and a blog. Please feel free to check those out and reach out to me on LinkedIn and Twitter. All right, without further ado, we'll kind of jump in. The contents, we're going to go over some coding tips, some D365 F&O tools, quality of life hacks, a bunch of different things that maybe you didn't know. And most of us probably didn't know until we were told. And so these can be really helpful. Once you start to learn them and practice them, they can streamline a lot of what you're doing. So let's start with the first one. Maybe a bunch of you guys know this, maybe not, but you can actually comment out blocks of code by clicking Control-K, and then while still holding the Control key down, push C. So I think of the C as in comment, and the Control-K is just what I have to remember to begin with. So instead of using the normal kind of /* and star / to comment out a block of code, you can just select it and then push Control-K-C. I think if I click here, it gives a little demonstration. This is super useful. You can use this in Visual Studio as well as a bunch of other editors. You can use this in SQL Server Management Studio. I found that in AX 2012, you actually need to use Control-E, then C to comment it out. But most languages or most editors use Control-K, then C. This is so nice when you need to comment out some code, try something out, and then maybe add it back. And speaking of adding it back, basically we can do the opposite of this. We can do Control-K, then U. I think of the U as uncomment. So C for comment, U for uncomment. And that's really useful to quickly comment out a block of code and uncomment it. And then additionally, we can push Control-K-D to help format our code. So maybe you got those pesky spaces or tabs that are not quite aligned. You can format some code that way. I definitely know it's a best practice to not have the right indentation. So it's always helpful that you can just push that Control-K and then D to fix up those indentations. All right, you can also push F9 to toggle a breakpoint. So we've got another example here. You can, of course, click on those numbers on the left-hand side to add a breakpoint and turn it off. But if you just stick your cursor on a line of code and you push F9, that will add a breakpoint to the code. And then you can push F9 again and it'll remove a breakpoint. And I know that that's just something that as developers we do so often, and it's really helpful to know the shortcut for that. And I found that's common in AX 2012 as well as a lot of different other editors. Okay, so go to main thing. So this can be really useful. You can hit F9 in design view to go to the main thing for an item selected. Or F9 on a table extension will take you to the base table. F9 on a field will take you to the EDT. F9 on a field with a relationship will take you to the related field. So many of you may not have known that, but that's super useful to be able to quickly navigate to what you're looking for rather than just try to search for things by hand. So I definitely recommend, if you haven't tried that one, try it out. Okay, to copy event handlers in the design view, expand the methods and then right click and say copy event handler and then specify what type of event handler you want, a pre-event handler or post-event handler. What that will do is it will put that generated code in your clipboard, and that'll allow you to then paste it into your event handler class. So that's super useful instead of you having to remember that syntax by hand. I do this all the time, so definitely a great way to do this. In design view, you can expand the events, right click, copy event handler, same deal. So you can select which event you want to pick up, copy it. It'll be in your clipboard for use when you want to paste it in your event handler class. Okay, now I'll hand it over to Nathan.
Thanks. Next, I wanted to cover the paste special functionality. So, one of the great things with F&O now is we can embed C# into our X++ if we'd like. So that opens up a lot of new things for us to do that X++ may not necessarily be the best suited for. And some of those are data contracts with outside providers that may provide something that is XML or JSON. And Visual Studio has this really cool piece of functionality where you can take XML or JSON and then just paste it as a class. So what this will do, so you go to edit, paste special, and then paste paste JSON as classes right here. This will turn something like what's on the left-hand side, which is just a JSON example file that I pulled, and turned it into what you see on the right-hand side. So you can see all of our classes. They're aware of collections. So you could take the representation of JSON on the left and turn it into a class representation on the right, which can be really handy and just help build out how you could deserialize stuff. And this also helps with serialization and deserialization when you're getting into like data contracts. And you'll notice in my screenshot that the XML option was missing. So in newer dev VMs, that is not installed. So if you are working with an outside provider that provides XML rather than JSON, you can just go into the Visual Studio installer, install ASP.NET Web Development, specifically the ASP.NET and Web Development tools, and that'll surface the paste XML as classes option.
Okay, so let's talk some about CrossCompany. CrossCompany is a keyword that you can use in queries to actually get your X++ while select statements and select statements to query data that are in other companies or legal entities. So you may remember that when you're within F&O, any select statements or while select statements you're running are going to automatically query data only in the company that you are logged into running as. So you may only have one company in your F&O instance, or you might have 10 different companies. And so one of the things we need to keep in mind is maybe the data we're looking for is actually in another company, and we need to process that data or query the data. By default, the X++ select statements are going to add essentially a where data area ID equals our current company, data area ID being our company. And so that's fantastic. It saves us a lot of writing that we have to do when we're writing T-SQL to query data. But sometimes we actually want to look at multiple companies. So in this particular example, you can see we're writing while select CrossCompany : con companies, and con companies is a container variable where we're listing several different companies. And what this allows us to do is while select our data, in this case from our tab bat data, our table buffer, but we're looping through several different companies that we've specified. So that's really useful. Let's look at maybe another example here, or I guess here we can look at a zoomed in example of our CrossCompany : companies. And we can also use CrossCompany queries. So in a query object, we'll use the method add company range, and we can list multiple companies. In this case, we've got the DAT company and the TWL company, and that's how we can get our query object to loop through multiple companies' data in our query object. So here we can see that zoomed in, add company range, DAT, and TWF. And then moving on from CrossCompany, we've got RunAsPermission. So there's certain operations that you need to do that you may want to run as a particular user. In this case, we're going to run with the admin permission. We're going to create a RunAsPermission object, instantiate it, passing an admin. We're going to assert that permission, and then run a particular, in this case, class and method, pass it some parameters, and then revert assert. This can be useful for different testing capabilities, and definitely something that you may not have known. Another useful function is string keep. There's a lot of just what I'll call global functions. They're actually part of a X++ global class. And these functions can really help us with string manipulation and other things. So string length being one of them. In this case, we can also do string keep, and we can test to see if this is a valid mobile number by essentially testing to see, keep all the digits that we've specified in our mobile number, our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and kind of remove the others. We've got string R fix and string L fix. This can be helpful, if I remember correctly, for, let's see, create a string with a length of 5, ending with the value of I and padded with zeros. So this can be really great if you need to pad a number with certain zeros. Okay, another really useful thing to keep in mind is you can actually write C# and other .NET code within the X++ code. Maybe you need to call an external web service, or you want to serialize some JSON or XML, or deal with an FTP site or an SFTP site, or even do some encryption. Those are really great examples where using C# to do that operation is great. Here we can see we're calling the Win API server, and we're creating a GUID. Let's see if I have a couple more zoomed in operations. But again, it's useful to know that you can call those .NET libraries within your X++ code. Some other stuff. So here, this next one is super, super useful. So let's say you're getting an error message and you can't find where it's coming from. Oftentimes I look in the label file and look for that particular error message. And then I do a find all references on that label. That's really useful that we can do that in D365. But other times we struggle sometimes to find that particular label. Maybe that label's got some formatting, some %1s in there. You can actually add a breakpoint to the info.add method. And then when that error message is being thrown, it's always going through this info.add method, and you can actually look at the call stack to understand, okay, what class or method is throwing that error message, and back out from there, put a breakpoint in that class and method, look at the variables, understand what contributed to that error being called. You can use function name to help print out the name of a function. You can use query build data source to string to see the SQL for a query, or at least SQL-like code. And that's really useful to understand, okay, why is my SQL not working? Data entities can be temperamental, DB sync, delete entity, rebuild list, test again. So that's another really useful tip. It's just data entities have some stuff going on behind the scenes. So if it's not working, I've definitely solved quite a few problems by just recreating my data entity and following these steps. So if you run into some problems with your data entities and there's nothing super obvious, definitely recommend doing those steps.
Thanks. So next, I want to talk about D365FO Tools. This is a open source set of PowerShell scripts that allow you to do all sorts of unique and interesting things from a command line with your developer environment, as well as any other environments you may have that are not production. So we'll cover some of the stuff that you can do. This is not an exhaustive list. I was actually working on updating this list because there's some new features and that came out just recently that I think people should use. But it's really simple to use. To install it, you just install it like any other PowerShell module, and you would update it just the same. But once you've got it installed, you can do all sorts of different things with your environment from a command line perspective, and you don't have to use like WMIC or anything else. You can just use all PowerShell. And in a little bit, we'll talk about why that's really helpful. So here's an example of you can stop an environment. You can stop all the environment, various parts of the environment, or stop it and just say, kill all my processes because something has gone awry. And you can, again, do this just from the command line. Similar with stopping, you can start an environment. Here's a few examples. You can start specific parts of your environment or just start everything. Similarly, you can restart your environment. So if you want to restart all services, and this is not just IIS Express or IIS, this will stop all services and restart all services to do a full sort of reset if you're running into some issues with your environment. And you don't want to do a full VM restart. Additionally, related to the admin provisioning tool, if you don't want to use that, there is a PowerShell option. So you can just say set D365 admin, give it a email address that is valid inside that machine, and it'll readmin that machine that instance to the user provided. And this is really helpful because Microsoft have just recently removed the admin provisioning tool. So if you still need that functionality, it's available here. Next, here's where we move away from just a developer-focused set of tooling to something, I guess, a bit more. And you can use these tools to orchestrate moving data around from your environment. So let's say your developers need a fresh set of data. One way to get that would be to create an export of the database from UAT or Sandbox and get that into your asset library, and then you can download it in from LCS and then restore it on a developer's machine. Conversely, you can do the same thing with a PowerShell command here. It's a bit complicated. In the notes for this presentation, there's a link to how to get specifically your bearer token. The rest is fairly easy to just source those values from inside LCS. But this is an example of a command that would export a database from a tier 2 LCS hosted environment and put it in your asset library for you to do something with later. And then this is all done again via command line. So you can orchestrate this through anything that can run PowerShell, including Azure DevOps build pipelines. Next, similarly, you can refresh a database, from prod to, let's say, UAT. Very similar command, but you're moving data from your production environment into your UAT or Sandbox environment in order to be able to move that into your LCS asset library to restore into a different environment. Next, you can use sync database for a specific module. So tooling inside Visual Studio is to be able to do a database sync on the solution that you have open or the entire system with the D365 admin or FO tools. You can give it a module name and it'll go through, find all the tables in that module and do a full sync on just those tables. So it's more of a targeted experience if that's what you're looking for. There's a lot of different things that you can do with this just to create some shortcuts and create database artifacts for enums or tables that you may have and build all those relationships so you can sort of keep on moving forward and not have to wait for a 10 or 15 minute full database sync in order to build everything out. Similarly, you can do a partial database sync. So you can give it a specific specific list of things you would like to sync with all of its children. So here in our examples, I'm looking at the customer entity and sales table. So we'd pick apart what needs to be built into that sync and sync all the artifacts related to that table. So then that table in and of itself will be fully synced, but if there's any other changes that haven't been synced, those will still be pending. So again, just more utility value so you can sync stuff you're working on and not have to wait for a full sync. Conversely, if you just want to do a full sync through the command line, you can do that. So here's the command to do that. This becomes really helpful because you can do a full database sync in PowerShell behind the scenes and still continue to work in Visual Studio. So you won't have the Visual Studio, like that modal window that you can't get rid of. You just sort of have to sit and watch it. This will allow you to do a DB sync in the background and continue working. Other stuff this can do is install supporting software. So it uses Chocolatey, if you're familiar with Chocolatey, to be aware of common stuff people would want to potentially use. And you can just call that out and have it be installed via command line. So if you want to install VS Code, there's the command to do that, the very first one. One that I use all the time is to install Chrome. That's the last command there. So again, you can just have a series of scripts that whenever you get a new developer VM, you just copy paste those over where you install D365FO Tools, install Chrome, re-admin it to you, do all the various stuff you do to get a machine set up, and it can all be done, again, via command line. You can additionally get an environment URL, so you don't have to open up iNet Manager if you don't want. You can do advanced searching inside the AOT for specific objects. So this can be helpful, finding specific things that you're not sure exactly what they may be named, especially with this gives you sort of an advanced search patterns. So if you're like, hey, yeah, I remember this class from 2012. It was, ACO something. You can do an advanced search, try and find it to see if it, it made it into F&O, and if so, where is it? You get the full name from that, and then you can take a look at it in Visual Studio. So there's a lot of different examples of what you can do for advanced searching using the D365FO tools. Additionally, you can throw the environment that you're in into maintenance mode. So this is tier 1 specific, but you can enable maintenance mode in your developer environment to update financial dimensions or do whatever do whatever you need to do that requires maintenance mode, and then pull it back out of maintenance mode when you're done. So really quick and easy. Excuse me. I seem to recall the steps for Microsoft not being as streamlined. So this just gives a very streamlined experience for that. Additionally, you can import a database into a tier 1 that came from a tier 2. The first command is, you will need to install some additional software related to SQL just to help convert from a backpack to a .bak. But once you've got that installed, you can take your backpack from your assets, LCS asset library, and then execute the command that you see on your screen, and that'll stage it to be ready for consumption inside your developer environment. So what this specific command is doing is restoring a backpack into your tier 1 environment with a new database name. So you can continue to work as you normally would. Your transactional database, or AXDB, is still there. It's still online. It's still doing everything it needs to do. So if you need 8 hours to restore a database from production to UAT, and then from UAT into a dev environment, you can do that all sort of in the background, and you can continue to work while that's going. Once this command is done, there's one additional command that's just set active database. So you'd say set active database, imported database, year, month, day, and then it would dynamically sort of do a switcheroo on the databases, and then you've got fresh data in your environment with whatever code you've been working on, so you don't have to necessarily lose a lot of time just because you need fresh data. Additionally, if you have, let's say you have a tier 1 environment that is a golden environment, you can export from a .bak into a backpack file, and upload that into LCS to deploy into a tier 2 environment.
Okay, let's look at some quality of life kind of improvements, things that you can do to that are fun. One thing that I'll say, Nathan kind of reminded me too of with the specific ability to search in PowerShell different objects. One thing that I like to do is go to the actual K drive where the files are stored. So specifically in the K drive, in AOS service packages local directory, you're going to find all of the XML files for all the source code, and you can actually use like a searching tool such as File Locator Pro. You can download that and use the light version for free to search the contents of the XML files. I know Windows File Explorer search isn't always the greatest tool, but using another tool like File Locator Pro can be really fast and an effective way to look for some specific text, whether it be a property on an object or code. I've used that sometimes to try to locate some code that I just don't quite remember the name of the object of where it's located, or maybe it's where it's called in several different places. Okay, so in another thing that we can do is run Visual Studio as an administrator. So you can search for Visual Studio 2017, 2019, 2022, whichever version you're looking at. You can right-click Open File Location, and then you can right-click that specific icon, go to Properties, and then click the Advanced button. And on the Advanced button, you're going to see this dialog where you can click the Run as Administrator checkbox and click OK. And that means now going forward, anytime you run Visual Studio from a shortcut, it's going to launch it as an administrator. And that's especially important when doing X++ development, as you really need Visual Studio to run as an administrator to function correctly. You can also right-click on, if you got that shortcut in your taskbar, you can right-click on that shortcut in the taskbar. When the pop-up comes up, right-click on kind of that start icon and say properties on that shortcut as well. And you'll get the same properties, click advanced, run as administrator. Super useful. It, takes a couple seconds the first time you do it, and then it's going to save you time every time afterwards. And no one likes it when you accidentally open it not as administrator, and then you end up having to close down what you're doing, reopen it as administrator. So it's nice to do this once and then not worry about it again. Okay. So let me look at this next one. So this next one, you can run SQL Server Management Studio as an administrator as well. So same deal, definitely really useful.
All right. Similar to sort of the last stuff I talked about related to 365FO tools, is you can run them inside Visual Studio, so you don't even have to have PowerShell open in the background if you don't like or don't want to do that. So you can have everything all in one screen. Additionally, if there's any other PowerShell scripts that you have that you'd like to use, so sort of what Peter was talking about with, I think it was File Search Pro. I have a PowerShell script version that I just aliased and put in my PowerShell profile. So whenever I need to search for, something, I can just navigate to a directory and say, find everything that contains the string, and it'll do a recursive search and bring back everything that contains that string. And I can do that all inside Visual Studio if I want to get that set up. So this is just a Visual Studio. You can see I have a new PowerShell interactive window along with all of my other windows along the bottom. And inside there, I can execute PowerShell commands. An example of this would be invoke dbsync or invoke D365 dbsync. So this is actually doing a full database sync through PowerShell inside Visual Studio, and you can sort of tell that it's doing a database sync because Sync Engine is running. Sync Engine is syncengine.exe is what does the actual database sync. So that's running behind the scenes, executed through PowerShell, and I don't have the window that I can't get rid of that I just have to sit and stare at inside Visual Studio. So I could be continuing to develop or whatever activities I may have going on inside Visual Studio. Again, that's just a close-up of the specific command. Additionally, if you want to use aliases inside PowerShell, I'm not the best at remembering commands inside of the D365FO tools. I think they're a bit too verbose for me. I mean, if it's more than 3 characters, I tend to not remember it. But you can use a profile that is specific to Visual Studio PowerShell just by typing, notepad $profile. And that will let you define any aliases that you like. So in this instance, I've aliased invoke D365 dbsync to just be the string dbsync. So when type that in, hit enter, it'll alias to my the actual command for that, invoke D365 DB sync. And again, you can tell it's working because sync engine is there and running. And that's just a closer up view of the specific command.
Okay, so let's talk about debugging batch jobs. So if in Visual Studio you can attach to process, you can click the show all processes from all users checkbox to make sure that you are actually seeing all processes listed. And then instead of attaching to IIS Express or W3WP service, if you want to debug a batch job, look for the batch.exe and attach to that batch process, and then just wait for your batch process to run. If it's set with a reoccurrence of every minute, you won't have to wait too long, that kind of thing. But you'll just wait, and eventually if you've got a breakpoint in your code, you will see that breakpoint get hit if you've attached to that batch.exe. So definitely really useful. I've got a video and an article on just this if you want to see kind of more details on that. Similarly, I've got a video on this just because this is so important, loading symbols. So that pesky debug symbols sometimes don't always load. And so you'll get these empty red circles when you go to debug, which means that Visual Studio is not matching the code that you have, or not tying kind of the code you have together with the running code. It's not able to kind of match those up, and it means if you run the code, it won't actually stop and break when you got your breakpoint. So it's really important to remember to go to Tools Options and uncheck. Under Tools Options, there's a few different settings, but under Dynamics 365 and Debugging, there's a load symbols only for items in the solution. Oftentimes, or most of the time, I'd say we want to uncheck that checkbox so that you can debug other base Microsoft code that's not actually added to your solution, because your solution may only contain objects in your model. And so if you want to debug other code, we really need that checkbox unchecked. So here's kind of a zoomed up view of that. We can also specify a default browser, such as Google Chrome, to run our code in, or D365 in. So that's really useful. Another thing that we need to do is go to debugging symbols and check the Microsoft symbol servers is a good idea, and then also check the load all modules unless excluded. So if you're having trouble getting your debug symbols loaded, make sure that load all modules is selected and there's nothing excluded. If you want to speed up your debugging, you definitely can specify load only specified modules and list those. But usually it doesn't take too long to attach the debugger, and loading all modules is just going to ensure that those symbols get loaded. There's nothing kind of more frustrating than when your symbols aren't loading and you can't figure out why. So definitely having that load all modules is a good way to fall back on and make sure that your symbols get loaded. Also, kind of before I move on, there's one other place where you can say debug just my code that's in those options. That's another setting that you want to uncheck. You want to make sure that the Microsoft code's getting loaded, all those symbols, and not just the code in your solution. So that's another option that I see oftentimes checked by default. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, another cool thing is there's dark mode plus custom colors. So in those same options, you can go to Environment, General, and change the color theme to dark mode, and definitely look like a cool developer. Maybe you've seen your friends use that, or maybe you just like it because it's a little easier on the eyes. Definitely a fun thing to know how to do. You can definitely modify a bunch of other fun fonts and colors as well in the fonts and colors section. So feel free to go to town. Be different from everyone else is pretty neat. So now you can see some of these updated colors.
Additionally, inside Visual Studio, they have the metadata search. So we've talked about a few different search algorithms or ways to just find stuff, whether it's through a label search, scanning files, looking at references. On top of that, Microsoft has the metadata search inside of Visual Studio. So when you're looking at the Application Explorer, you can type in one of the search commands that is just more than, I want to look at sales table. So you type in sales table and hit enter. You can specify types, and there's a search sort of search syntax that is available. It's not painfully apparent. It's not documented the greatest. But if you want to search for a particular type, you can do that. One of the things that I found really helpful is the type search for type class where the extension point is an event delegate. Sometimes you may not necessarily know you have event delegates or where they're hooked in or how they're connected or attached. So you can get a list there of your event delegates, see what they're connected to, because they may not necessarily always show up in a reference search. Usually they do, but sometimes, I've had it happen at least once where it hasn't. So again, this is just a handy way to find the different elements in the AOT. Additionally, I picked this up from Twitter. If you're looking for if you have the public name for a data entity, that is the OData public name, and you're not sure exactly what actual data entity that ties back to, you can say, search on type as a data entity view property, property is attribute equals value, or public collection name equals customer statistics groups. And then that will search all of the AOT by type and find any elements that match that search pattern. You should only ever get one. But again, this is another way to just go from some external identifier that may not be surfaced easily or very well inside the AOT or Application Explorer, and then search on it and go from, I don't know what this refers to specifically to, I've got my single element that this refers to. And sort of our last thing that I want to talk about, this was a recent addition, is the TRUD utils D365. This is an open source set of tools to help with really productivity inside Visual Studio. So if you're familiar with AX 2009 and 2012, inside the MorphX IDE, you could make custom scripts that would do whatever you wanted. It's in a similar vein as that. So I'm trying to remember of a few that Microsoft shipped in 2012, and they're really escaping me. But very similar functionality to that. So when you look at stuff in Designer View, you've got the out-of-the-box add-ins from Microsoft, and then you have these additional things here from the TRUD utils. And I was just going to highlight a few. If you're interested, certainly check this out. It's available on GitHub. It's free. But when you want to start, developing or prototyping, these can come in relatively handy because if you are looking at a sales, the sales table in Design View, you can just right-click and make an extension, and it'll make an extension, throw it in your project. And I mean, not much more to report on that. Just a quick and handy thing to streamline the process. You can do the same thing inside native Visual Studio, but not from the Designer View. Additionally, this is what the extension or table extension looks like. Not much to show, but again, just a quick and handy way to start prototyping some of your assets. Additionally, if you've got a table and you want to make an extension class, you can right-click and create extension class, and you can define some of the attributes on that. to get an extension class related to that specific table. And then you've got just a shell of a class, but it has all of the markings and identifiers for an extension class. So again, just handy and quick way of making, prototyping different elements for different scenarios. Everything that's been presented here, we have, I guess here's a list of all the links that we sourced everything from. If you have any questions or concerns, let us know. There are some slides related to PowerShell that are, those links are in the speaker notes because they're pretty advanced. But everything is available, linked and sourced somewhere throughout the presentation. And this presentation will be available, the PowerPoint for this presentation will be available on my GitHub, within 24 hours of this recording. So thank you again. My name is Nathan Clouse. There's all my contact info. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, any cool tips, feel free to reach out to Peter or I at any time. We're around. We're easy to find. So yeah, I'll sort of hand it off to you, Peter, for your closing.
Sure. Thank you again so much for watching this video. Thank you to Nathan for inviting me in to present with him on all this great material. Hopefully you learned something new. And yeah, thank you again. I really appreciate you watching. If you liked the video, click the like button. I also invite you to push the subscribe button as well. If there's other topics you would like to see a video on, please post in the comments and I'll see what I can do. I hope you learned something new today. Thank you.